So to fix any problems between societies, you would do what? Put a mirror in there? Or?
And smoke.
Okay, thank you. Those are really three very interesting talks. I have a question actually for Peter. I think I know what he'll say, but you started out your talk saying that you were interested in this very interesting question of what makes strong and cohesive states. Actually, that's what it's set up on the board, on the slide. And then in your concluding slide, it also said strong and cohesive. But you kept saying strong, cohesive, and just. And, well, since you're a scientist, I know. So these are all independent features, right? I mean, this is really where I think this is maybe something I was talking to Roger about on the side. It's just about sort of popular epistemology. I think some people that this is, again, maybe I'll be on the side of expertise here. I think there's a tendency to run things together and to assume that there are connections that there aren't necessarily. And this is where science in general or high epistemic standards comes in, because it may well be the case, I take it, I mean, I don't know the answer to this question, that strong and cohesive don't necessarily go with just, or that these things may fall apart. So I guess I just want to know how you think about, because we could then start to make the list, just as we do with flourishing in general, right? The list of features that we'd like, you know, are order, virtue, goodness, happiness, great sex, etc. You know, you get the idea.
Yes. Well, I folded a lot of things in that 10 minutes that I talked, and so I threw in the justice there because I didn't want. Well, in America, strong state doesn't necessarily bring only good connotations, right? You also think about very strong states doing evil things. So that was one of the reasons why I threw in justice. But I do think that when we start talking about collective action, concerted collective action, and here I like Ibn Khaldun's term asabiya. All right. So in order for, which I define as ability of a group or a society for concerted collective action. All right. When the sum is greater than the individuals comprising the group. Now, in order to for a society to become effective at collective action, you do need justice. All right. Because in order for people to cooperate, you need things like trust, justice, and you also need the ability to punish shirkers, which is sort of the more negative side. You need to have all those components to actually operate together. All right. So I actually have like several hundreds of pages in my book on this issue, so I'm just trying to be reasonably brief about it. But I didn't put it on by chance. I think that it is actually, in order for a state to be truly strong, not in a situation where one small group oppresses the majority, where the cooperation, the basis of cooperation is very widespread. You do need things like trust and justice. Equity, another one. You know, it cannot be. You cannot have two great divisions, economic and social divisions between people.
Amma, I have a question to you and a question to Peter. Two questions for you. Did you or do you plan to try to look with fMRI the changes, if there are new areas which are really change after you do the mirror training? That's the first question. And the second question to you is, if you think that it can be extended beyond the sensory function, motor function, sensory motor function, also to some cognitive function that can be tempered by stroke?
That's two very good questions. One is, have you done functional imaging on some of these patients? Of course, we've done it with the mirror. I haven't done it, but Hertz Fleur and that group has done it and done a beautiful job with it. And they see relief from pain, but they can also map the changes in the brain using fMR to show that. It happens
only in the one hemisphere, the one which is which one, the contra or
the one contra to the amputation. The other thing is setting up experiments where, remember I said with the phantom limb patient, if I touch Pat Churchland, I don't want to keep picking on her, but anybody here in the audience, if I touch and I watch them, I experience the pain or I experience the touch quite literally. So what we're going to do is look at people with intact arms, like you've done that, right? Marco here has done that. So you got a person with an intact arm, you touch somebody else, and you look at the degree of activation in the mirror neuron system. And then with the arm amputated, where the patient is literally feeling Pat or anybody else being touched, then is there greater activation? So you want to track the perceptual thing. One of the things we found, by the way, is very interesting, is when you have pain in the phantom, one of these 3 patients experienced pain. When he watched his wife massaging her own hand, he claimed that this instantly reduced the pain in her phantom. This needs to be confirmed on a large-scale trial, obviously, but it's a very striking observation. So the answer to your first question is, yeah, brain imaging experiments, some of them have been done on regular phantom limbs and mirrors, and some on the mirror neuron idea we're now starting to test. Your second question is even more intriguing. That is, does it have relevance to other types of, for example, emotional empathy? If I'm deprived of emotion, does it make me more empathetic? We've been thinking along those lines, and also we're interested in things like panic attacks and using the same kind of reasoning, but I think time is running short, and I don't want to give another lecture.
Okay, so short question for Peter. You mentioned the fact that to turn the collective of entities, human being in this case, into society, you need some purpose that might be provided by common belief. And what I wanted to ask you is this unnecessary and sufficient, or only necessary? Because it seemed to me that advanced communication means that can propagate across the size of the new empire is a must in order for this system to behave or to act in a coherent way like a new entity.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me put it this way, that historically we find that integrative ideologies have played a very important role in the ability of huge human collectives, tens of millions of people, to actually create a society which is not torn apart by centrifugal forces. This doesn't mean that this is the only way to do it, obviously. But my argument against the so-called new atheists is that, well, don't, until you have proposed something good and you know that works, right? Don't break the mechanism that has survived literally millennia of social evolution and has proven its ability to keep societies integrated. But just because something has been done in the past doesn't mean necessarily that that's the only way we can approach the future. After all, our brains apparently have evolved as mechanisms for social calculation, but we now use them to calculate whatever, not just who did what to whom and who said what about it. We now use it for much more general things. And actually, this was a question raised earlier by, I think, Jonathan. So in order for us to get the whole humanity integrated together into one group, maybe we don't necessarily have to invent some aliens, right, who would attack us. Maybe we can again sublimate somehow our ability to cooperate by creating a credible enemy, which doesn't have to be another thinking set of beings, although I don't know how to do it, to tell the truth.
But that sort of maps onto what Sally was saying, wasn't it? You almost have to do the obverse of what you were expecting.
Mm-hmm. This is a question for Professor Ramachandran. So somebody touches you, and I have my mirror neurons being activated. Assume I'm the one touching you. Does it work in the same way? That is, does it matter that I'm the passive observant, or is there a change when I'm actually the active agent?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. It's a very good question. We can test it tomorrow. Sorry, I don't know the answer. That's a very, very legitimate question.
A historical moment.
I know. I don't know everything.
I have a question for Sally regarding the overreaction to 9/11 and the funds that went into PTSD. And if I heard you correctly, in the Oklahoma bombing, the data that came out, about a third of the people who were in the building got PTSD, and you can say, well, 2/3 didn't. But on the other hand, a third of the people that were close to that building in New York is a lot of people. And so I'm not sure whether it really was an overreaction. I mean, you want to watch out for that kind of thing, right? Don't you?
Well, the folks in the Oklahoma City bombing were in the building. The folks in New York City were in the Bronx. I mean, that was the folks they were concerned about. Certainly not the ones who were in direct threat. And actually, I didn't get to mention this, but the data kind of bore out my expectation and others. In fact, the Sunday after September 11th, 27 psychologists wrote a letter. In fact, it was to the American Psychological Association newsletter, but it was published in the New York Times. Erica Good just happened to cover it. And right away they were cautioning against an overreaction and the application of these, frankly, bogus therapies. But as far as data, how many people actually, there were a number of studies that looked at utilization, and there was hardly any bumps in the clinics, and those who did require medication were folks who were already once on medication. So it was a vulnerable group that, was already there. So I think one really could conclude that it was a very healthy public response to a devastating situation, and proved the mental health profession wrong in their expectation.
So just to follow up, I heard that although it may be true that there weren't new cases that were reported, that as many as you would expect, there were flare-ups in people who had previous PTSD experiences in some similar circumstances that recurred. And
if you happen to be referring to the one of the VAs in the Bronx really prepared for a lot of the reactivated PTSD. They didn't get nearly as much as they thought, but that's a known phenomenon, certainly, that people who have, in fact, that was in the news quite a bit with respect to the Vietnam veterans. It's really quite a fascinating, I'll be very brief, but quite fascinating how 30 years to 40 years after Vietnam experience, there's been a flood of men, exclusively men, who now are applying for disability benefits. And you have to think, gosh, did they not know they were sick for 30 years? Or is this a reactivation of a recovery episode that they had? Or do they not have good retirement accounts? I know that's a very cynical response, but it's one certainly has to consider when it comes to entitlements in general. And to me, so yes, certainly the reactivation phenomenon is true. Interestingly, it's not uncommon in veterans also or others who are retiring, and they're leaving the world of work. They're kind of dislocated in their life, and really any kind of disruption can often recall these things. What's key from a policy standpoint is that these are rarely permanent conditions. They resolve as well, and that's why disability is not the proper response to this kind of complaint. But it does happen, yes.
Dan?
This is a question for Rama, another possible experimental permutation that may be implied by what you were saying, and maybe it has implications for empathy and integration. If in watching you being poked or pricked with a pin or something like that, I were to have someone poking me and pricking me with a pin while you were being pricked, and that was done repeatedly, such that I began to learn that although I wasn't supposed to feel the touch or the prick that you're having, I'm just supposed to be able to, could I eventually be forced to learn to always feel that touch or prick when the other person is having it, and could that potentially create greater empathy?
That's a very good question. So you're saying you could reach a state where you don't even need to do the deafferentation or amputation, but simply through associative learning you can reach a point where the empathy becomes more real, and whether there's a spillover effect. You're just doing it for pain and touch, but then it makes you more empathetic altogether in the emotional realm. And that's a very good question, and it's worth exploring. We haven't directly explored it. But related to the question you raised about whether this general principle of using feedback and all of that can be applied to other contexts besides phantom pain, RSD, stroke, and so on and so forth. One example that comes to mind, and I have a student working on this, is actually with panic attacks. Now, nobody really understands the physiology of panic attacks, but one hunch is, and this is anticipated by other research, but what I think is going on is that there's an autonomic storm, that there is outbursts of firing from the limbic hypothalamic circuits, which normally is set off by a real lion or a tiger or something vicious, and you have to prepare your body for fighting, fleeing, and all that, and there's an autonomic storm. But if this mechanism gets set off without any real trigger in the outside world, you get panic because there's nothing to attribute it to. You say, my God, I'm dying. Why is my heart pounding? Why am I feeling so terrified? There's this sense of impending doom, and that's what creates very simplified account of panic attack. So what I said was, if this is true, what if you give the guy an iPhone, and every time, these people actually have a little bit of an aura prior to the attack, sometimes preceding several seconds. You switch it on and see a picture of a terrifying scene. So now your brain can attribute your internal, your heartbeat and your sweating and all of that to an external source. Now you may say, well, that's stupid because he knows it's his iPhone, it's not really that, but it doesn't matter, just like the mirror. Okay, you know it's a mirror, but it works anyway. Or when you go to a horror movie, you know it's a movie, but it still works. So conceivably, using this technique, you could abort panic attacks. We don't know the answer to that, but along the lines that you were suggesting.
You should suggest that to Stephen Jobs, perhaps, at this next... there is an interesting book which Rob Zepps has been recommending to me, which I looked at the other day by a Canadian journalist whose name I can't remember, I do apologize, called The Science of Fear. And there is a great deal of information there, which I think you'll find rather interesting. One of the things being that you can't just do one thing. He opened the book, Rob, I think, with a description of how after 9/11, despite the horror and the 3,000 deaths and so on and so forth, people have, I think it was Gert Gigerenzer, went and did some studies about the collateral effects after that of people deciding not to fly and driving. And the number of deaths as a direct cause of deciding not to fly to avoid dying was 1,585 or something in subsequent years. It was a horrific rate. So you just can't just do one thing, and I think that's what Peter's saying in terms of looking at these systems as well.